Hello, beautiful humans. I wanted to get on and give a little recap of the last week of trial and highlight some of the things that I thought were important that came out. And I'm going to show a few clips of videos, and I want to thank Hidden True Crime because I'm using the videos from their live stream of the trial in order to present the things that I thought were important this week. So I want to just go through. I was actually physically in court on Monday, and I was able to obviously see Chad in person for the first time, see all of these other players for the first time that I've been watching throughout the trial. Lindsay Blake is one of my favorite people. I think she does an excellent job. Getting to see John Pryor and his mannerisms and body language in person kind of puts it together with the picture and the sound of his voice and the way that he talks to his the witnesses that he is cross-examining. That was really interesting. I've been a fan of Judge Boyce throughout this entire process. I really appreciate the way that he keeps his courtroom, and he does an excellent job, I think, of keeping his own emotions under wraps while he's doing these proceedings, and he's very calm and very methodical, and he does things exactly the way that he needs to in order to get everything done. It was great to see the jury in person, to be able to look at the faces of those people and to sort of assess how well they're paying attention and where they're taking notes and the different places in which they have emotional reactions and things like that. It was interesting to sit there with the gallery. There are, of course, were a ton of people that I didn't know, but there were also people that were very familiar to me. Lauren Matthias is there, of course, and Nate Eaton from East Idaho News. And I had the privilege of sitting right next to Larry. Kay was not there the day that I was there. She was so exhausted from the memorial service over the weekend. So she wasn't able to be there, but I got to meet lots of Tammy's family members and got to meet Aunt Vicky in person, for example. And it was really excellent to be there in the courtroom with all of these people who care so much about justice for Tammy and JJ and Tylee and Charles. Um, it was a pretty emotional day as well. So the entire morning was the FBI agent who was on the CAST team, which I forget the acronym for that, but it's essentially the data that they collect from cell phones as far as location. And he went into great detail about how the cell towers work and how they overlap coverage, and how if you send or receive a message when you're in a particular place, it's very precise about saying you had to be in this area where these two things overlap in order for it to create an event here. He said that there was a software that they use, that they essentially load a piece of equipment into the back of a car and they drive all the roads in an area in order to pick up data and information from the cell towers. So they're able to very easily and accurately pinpoint somebody's location, and they use that in conjunction with the data that they got from Google from the email accounts of all of the parties involved. So he spent quite a lot of time going into those details because I think that they want to make sure that the equipment itself is unimpeachable, that the process is unimpeachable, that they were very thorough, that there were multiple people involved, multiple agencies involved. They went to great lengths to make sure that the data that they got was accurate. Even with all of that, Pryor tried to sort of pick it apart by focusing on the fact that this particular package of software that they used is only available to law enforcement. But on redirect, Rob Wood did a good job of reminding everybody, reminding the jury that the components for the software are available to lay people, and a civilian could go in and use that software to reach the same conclusions. It's just put in a package for law enforcement that isn't available to the public. So I think that was Pryor's sort of weak attempt at trying to impeach the data, because it's pretty irrefutable. And so maybe that was his only option. I don't know. I don't like to try to put myself in Pryor's position too often, because I can't imagine having to defend somebody where the evidence is so overwhelming that he's a conspirator. Now, the thing that I always get a little bit concerned about is the evidence is also pretty circumstantial. Other than in Lori's case, there was a hair on a piece of duct tape, but that could easily be dismissed as, there's hair everywhere. I take dog hair with me everywhere I go. Hairs get attached. If you live in the same house with somebody, you're going to have their hair on you somewhere at some point. It's just the way that works. So anyway, I was always very nervous about the fact that the evidence is super circumstantial. I think in Chad's case, it's similar, and we haven't seen anything yet that's been super damning except this cast data. So I will tell you, without having to go back and listen to all the testimony, and even without showing you clips, I will just tell you the most important thing I think that came out of that cast data was that on September 9th, which is the day after JJ was last seen, Chad calls Alex, and then a short time later, Alex's device is picked up in Chad's yard. And on September 23rd in the morning, which is the day after Kylie was last seen, Chad calls Alex, and then a short time later, Alex's device is seen in Chad's yard. Now, the locations where Alex's phone was seen, you can only get to that by going through a gate that's at the side of Chad's property. I also went up and visited Chad's property while I was in Rexburg the day after the memorial, and I'll show you the video of that, and we can talk about exactly the access points and how he got on there. We'll talk about the size of the property, since Pryor is so hyper-focused on the size of his property. No pun intended. The other interesting thing is that Alex's device was not seen at Chad's house the night Tammy was shot at, or the night she was killed. And so what I get from that, and I did a short video about this a few days ago, what I get from that is that Alex is smart enough to either turn off his location services or leave his device at home when he's committing a crime, but not when he's engaging in covering up that crime. And I think that the phone call to Alex on both of the mornings in question was to tell him, okay, Tammy's gone, the coast is clear, you can come over now. And so I think that it's very consequential evidence that Chad and Alex were in close contact. Alex's phone was also seen at Chad's property on August 7th, August 24th, September 6th, September 25th, and October 15th. So even though those were dates that didn't have anything to do with anyone's death, it clearly shows that Alex is there every couple of weeks, every week in some cases. And so obviously Chad and Alex have a very close relationship. Now, if you believe, as most people do, that Alex was the one who actually got his hands dirty, and so the rest of the evidence is kind of sketchy about whether or not Chad was involved, well, this directly proves that Chad was involved, because they were in contact constantly, and there's a lot of communication between the two of them on the dates in question. So that was the main thing that we got out of the morning. John Pryor is continuing to try and sell this narrative that it was a paintball gun and not a real gun. And he also keeps talking about the size of his property. And he did ask law enforcement, why didn't you look at the cell phones of Melody Gibb and David Warwick? Well, that came out a little bit later in the week, when this particular cast expert was just looking at the data he was told to look at. He's not the one who determines whose phones get looked at. But the detective later in the week talked about how they determine whose phones get looked at. And they submitted a request to Google for 12 different email addresses and Google identifiers. So Google identifies each customer or each account with a specific identifier number. It's like a 16-digit number. And so the police submitted 12 different numbers that they wanted to look at. And Google came back and said, that's too many. We can't possibly do that many. So they reduced the list by 2, submitted it with 10, and then they were able to get the data back. So I guarantee you law enforcement has looked at Melanie Gibb and David Warwick. I do think that they know way more than they're willing to say publicly. I do think that Melanie has some kind of a deal, that she testified in exchange for some kind of immunity. We may never know about that, which I think is sad, because Melanie and David were the ones who were there the night that JJ was killed. And so I wish, and I think everybody wishes, that they would say more, do more, that they would be questioned more, so that we could figure out what was going on. So in the afternoon on Monday, we had Hannah Nicole Parker Munoz. She's the second cousin of Tammy Daybell, and she gave testimony about visiting the memorial service for Tammy. And she went through the receiving line twice during the viewing, once with her father, once with her mother, and Chad gave wildly different stories on each of those occasions about what happened to Tammy. It was like he couldn't get his story straight. And then we have, even from his neighbor later in the week, yet a different story. So there are at least 4 versions of how Tammy died out there that were given by Chad, and we now have testimony that he changed his story quite a lot. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen so that we can listen to this testimony, so you can hear the different versions of the story, because I want to make sure that we get it correct.
That said that he's
Judge, there's levels of hearsay here. Well, Ms. Ferguson, if they're soliciting comments of the defendant, would be an exception. If they're comments of the father, would be hearsay. So I'm not sure where the witness is going with this. Maybe you can direct the witness to avoid that hearsay.
I will, Your Honor.
Thank you.
So just in context of what Chad may have said in that conversation, can you explain to the jury what you first remember him saying about anything?
Yeah, he said that Tammy had been sick that day. He said that she had been vomiting and coughing. And then around 10 p.m., she had vomited again, and then came to his office and said that she was feeling a little bit better. And he said that she was going to bed, and that he stayed in his office working. And then around 1 a.m., he went upstairs and found Tammy on the floor. And he said that she had rolled out of the bed and was on the floor, and that he found her cold and already passed.
Okay, so this is really important. She says that Tammy had been sick and coughing. She threw up. She came to Chad's office at 10 p.m., said she was feeling a little bit better. And then at 1 a.m., then she went to bed. And then at 1 a.m., Chad came and found her deceased. That's story number 1. Now let's go back and hear story number 2.
He said that she had been vomiting and coughing. And then around 10 p.m., she had vomited again, and then came to his office and said that she was feeling a little bit better. And he said that she was going to bed, and that he stayed in his office working. And then around 1 a.m., he went upstairs. Okay, sorry, that was also the first story. My apologies. Here's the second story. Around 10 p.m., she had vomited again, and then came to his office and said that she was feeling a little bit better. Okay, I don't know what's happening. Let me go back to my other screen and see if I can get the other video to come up. My apologies.
I'm gonna go here. So this is supposed to be the first one. Okay, here's the second one. And I just got to make sure that we play it correctly.
Tammy had been sick that day.
Okay, this is definitely the second one. So forgive all the superfluous, everything that's around here, but let's listen to this one.
He said that she had been vomiting and coughing. And then around 10 p.m., she had vomited again and then came to his office and said that she was feeling a little bit better. And he said that she was going to bed and that he stayed in his office working. And then around 1 a.m., he went upstairs and found Tammy on the floor. And he said that she had rolled out of the bed and was on the floor, and that he found her cold and already passed.
So that was the first one. I'm just going to keep it playing because here comes the second one.
There's a lot of information just for clarity. Some follow-up. So when you said he described this, was he talking about the night that she passed?
Yes.
Also, look at Chad's face. Look at how smug he is. And I remember seeing him in the courtroom and the faces that he was making while this witness was on the stand, like he doesn't believe what she's saying. And it's just so sickening to see him be smug.
I think you said that she came to him at 10 o'clock. Is that right?
Yes.
What time do you remember, if at all, that he said that Tammy went to bed that night?
He said Tammy went to bed around 10.
And what time was it that you said he finally went to bed himself?
Around 1 a.m.
And when was it that he said that he found Tammy on the floor, passed away?
Around 1 a.m.
So he was, is there any?
Do you see that little nod? Chad just did a little nod, like confirming 1 a.m. Yep.
Yes.
What did you notice?
I noticed that he seemed calmer than I would have expected, and that he would get emotional only when my dad would get emotional and then would stop, like once my dad stopped.
Why did that stand out to you?
It stood out to me because I would have expected someone who just lost their partner to be a little more distraught. And he seemed calmer than I would have expected him to be.
Okay. So I'm really glad that Rob Wood went over and reconfirmed all of that because it's super, super important. Okay, hopefully this will start playing at the correct time. Let's see.
Only when my dad would get emotional.
Nope, it sure didn't.
Why did that stand out to you?
It stood out to me because I would have expected someone who just lost their partner to be a little more distraught. And he seemed calmer than I would have expected him to be.
And in fact, are you married?
Yes.
Now, later that evening, you said, I think earlier, that you also went through the line with your mother.
Yes.
About how long after the time you went through with your dad did you also go through the line with your mother?
About 2 hours.
Could you please just explain to the jury your experience when you went through the line with your mother?
Yes. They were talking and Chad was telling us what happened. And he said that she had been coughing that day. And that she'd been coughing pretty violently. So he was worried about her. Between 9 and 10, she came down to his office and said that she was going to rest and go to bed.
Okay, that's really important. She said he came down to his office. She did not say downstairs. She just said came down to his office. This is going to be important in a second.
Worried about her, so he went to bed at this time. And then at around midnight, he woke up to her rolling out of bed and hitting the floor. He said that he went to check on her and had found that she had passed.
So this is a completely different story. This is Chad saying that Tammy came down to his office around 10 p.m., that she wasn't feeling well, and that he was worried about her, so he went to bed with her. And then at midnight, he woke up because she had rolled out of bed and she was deceased at that time. Now we know he did not call the police until 6 o'clock in the morning. So these two stories are wildly different and also really troubling, because if he knew that she was dead at midnight and didn't call until 6 a.m., that's a problem. Even if she died at 2 a.m. and didn't call until 6 a.m., that's a problem. Also, dead bodies do not roll out of bed. And we also had the coroner testify to that fact, that it would create, she said it would require a great amount of force for a body to roll out of bed that way. So we know that that's just totally implausible, and that's not the way that it happened. So next, Hannah's mom, Patty, comes up to the stand. And I'm not sure why my time markers are not working properly. If anybody knows how to fix that, I would appreciate some assistance. Now this is John Pryor coming back to gaslight the witness. But of course,
About her, so he went to bed at this time. And
let
then-
me just find the spot that we need over here. So you don't have to sit through the entire thing. Okay, so this is John Pryor cross-examining Hannah.
Rocky?
outside of court proceedings now.
Now, your testimony is that at midnight, Tammy went downstairs to check on Chad in his office. Is that right? Objection misstates the testimony. Same. Did you mention about him going downstairs to meet with Tammy, going downstairs to meet with Chad at any point?
Yes.
Okay, what did you make reference to?
Pryor looks at the
I
jury.
was talking to Chad with my father.
Yeah.
He said that Tammy had gone down to say that she had thrown up and was feeling a little better and then was going to bed.
Okay,
Um,
okay. So Tammy was upstairs in her bedroom. And then she went downstairs to go into an office to talk to Chad. Is that what you understood?
yes.
Okay. Are you aware that this is a one-story home, ma'am?
No, I've never been to their home.
Okay. And then after, again, when you were in the line with your mother, and you mentioned something about going downstairs, which downstairs were we going to?
Again, I haven't been to their home.
Okay, nothing else, Judge. Thank you.
Okay, I just think this is really despicable, because John Pryor knows the house. He knows that there is an upstairs and a downstairs. The main part of the home is one story. That is true. But there is a part of the home that has an upstairs and a downstairs. So he's gaslighting this witness. He's basically trying to make her incredible to the jury by impeaching her use of the word down. She did not say stairs. She just said down. And if you notice the first objection that Rob Wood gave, he said misstates the testimony, which is exactly what Pryor was doing. But then when he asks her, did you say downstairs? And the witness says yes, because when she said down, and I guess in her mind, when Chad said Tammy came down to the office, could have been down the hallway. Didn't necessarily mean it was downstairs, but this witness in her mind, and she's never been to the house, in her mind, she thought maybe stairs were involved. And that's where we get that misunderstanding. Now I'm going to show you the video that I took while I was visiting Chad's property in Rexburg. If I can bring it up here. This is right next to Chad's property. This is there's a little gate right here that you have to, it's you know, a locked gate, chain link fence. This is the house right here. These are the two streets. I'm standing on this street that's right next to their house. And then the street in front is where most people have seen his house. The driveway is over here. So I'm going to go ahead and play this for you. There's the main house right there. And there is the upstairs addition. This over here later in the week, Heather Daybell testified that this structure was referred to by the family as the cozy cone. And there is an upstairs. There's a window right here. You may have seen that looking out from this window, you can see where JJ was buried, which I'll show when I pan across here in just a second. And apparently out in this addition to the house was where Garth kept some of his instruments and things like that. And so later on, John Pryor is going to try to say there's no utilities out to this addition, that it's not a dwelling place. He later asks Heather where Tammy's bedroom is. He just stays on this narrative that there's no upstairs, downstairs, and that this witness was incorrect, because it's really damning to Chad that this witness had two different accounts, wildly different accounts of what happened and what Chad said happened the night Tammy died. So I'm going to just play the rest of this so you can see the property a little bit more. Now, this part of the yard is fenced off where you can see these trees over here. And on the other side of this fence is where the burn pit is and the pet cemetery. And I walked along this way and zoomed in so that you can see where Chad's property ends. This is not a large property. Those cows over there do not belong to Chad. His fence ends right here. So if you go along this fence, this little tree is his, this little tree is his, but this fence over here is where the property ends. It is not a large property. It's 3 3/4 of an acre. And as we come around here, you can see right next to this red little barn or outbuilding, this is where the burn pit was located. And just beyond that is the tree where JJ was buried. They have built some kind of a structure over this. I think it's possible that it may be a chicken coop, but it is a new structure. It's newer than this building right here. The wood is weathered, but it's not that weathered, so it's maybe only been there a year or maybe 2 years. And in the photos where the children's bodies are being exhumed or uncovered, this location right here where this building is now is where they had a tent over so that they could recover Tylee's remains. I felt a deep sense of reverence for this place, the last resting place of Tylee and JJ, and a deep sadness being here on this property. You can see the tree over here, and this is the little indentation where the pond would have been. And looking back over the property to the house, it's just not that far away. It's not that big. And this road is a fairly busy road. In the few short minutes that I was there, probably 10 or 15 cars passed by. And they were not looky-loos. They were people who legitimately were driving past at a normal rate of speed. So this is a pretty busy area. And if Chad were out here burning something right here, everybody would have seen it and, you know, would have experienced what that was like. So this was just, it was very eerie to be here, but I definitely felt some reverence for this place. So let's move ahead now to Patty Leader, who is the mother of Hannah, who just testified. And we'll go right here. She testified to basically the same thing that Hannah testified to about Chad's story when they went through the receiving line. And then she talked a little bit about the funeral and what bothered her there.
Oh, ma'am.
And again, I'm going to have to actually go to the location because My technology is not working properly.
Service, did you happen to hear Chad speak?
I did.
Was there anything about his talk or speak, service that caused you concern or stuck out to you?
Yeah, there was a couple things that he said that, I just thought weren't very nice.
What were those things?
He said that, the first thing he said was that she wasn't easy to live with. He said that, she was lazy. He said that she had depression, which she did, but to say it out in front of the whole congregation, I thought was, I guess, embarrassing for her. I don't know.
So why were those things of concern to you?
I just didn't think they were very nice.
So, first of all, to have a grieving, quote unquote, grieving widower speak at the funeral of their partner, most partners aren't capable of doing that because they're still the grief is still very fresh for them. And this was just a few days after Tammy died. She died on a Saturday and her funeral was on a Tuesday. And it was also out of town. It was in Springville, where Tammy was from, which is about 4-ish, maybe 5 hours south of Rexburg. So it was a big deal for the family to travel down there and for them to get all the arrangements ready in that amount of time. And to hear Chad speak disparagingly of Tammy at her funeral, to say that she was lazy and to share about her depression in public like that, and to say she wasn't easy to get along with, incredibly disrespectful. And then Heather Daybell shared later that one of the songs that they sang at the funeral service was called "Put Your Shoulder to the Wheel." It is an old Mormon hymn. It's been around forever, but it's not something that you would ever sing at a funeral service. Most of the time at Mormon funerals, they will either sing "How Great Thou Art" or something else that's more comforting about the love of God or the love of Jesus. "Put your shoulder to the wheel" goes like this: "Put your shoulder to the wheel, push along." And they're kind of talking about like the pioneers, right? Crossing the plains when their hand carts and their wagons, "Put your shoulder to the wheel, push along. Do your duty with a heart full of song. We all have work. Let no one shirk. Put your shoulder to the wheel." Meaning all of us are busy. We all have hardships. We all have things we have to do. Let nobody sit down and shirk their duty just because it's hard. And so I just think that using that song as a funeral song, I just don't really even have any good words for that. So we're going to go on now to the next day was Tuesday, and we didn't have court that day because there was an officer, unfortunately, who lost his life in the line of duty. They wanted all the bailiffs and officers to be able to attend those services, and so they didn't have court on Tuesday. So then on Wednesday in the morning was the medical examiner, and the medical examiner stated unequivocally that the cause of death was asphyxia, and that the manner of death was homicide, which basically just means at the hands of another. And then she did a great job of discrediting Pryor's assertions that it could have been anemia, it could have been low blood pressure, she had fainting spells, she had seizures, she was using homeopathic remedies. So Pryor tried to really put some doubt in the minds of the jurors about Tammy's cause of death, and the medical examiner was able to shut that down.
Your Honor, if I may respond, Dr. Christensen's testimony was he saw a notation of it from 5 years previous to that, and
They're talking
Mr. Pryor
about
went into it on his cross-examination.
anemia.
So we're Mr. Pryor. Continue.
Could that indicate that the anemia was treated?
It could. It just means that it certainly was not mentioned again as applicable.
In looking at those medical records, do you recall seeing any indication that Tammy had low blood pressure?
Her blood pressure was on the lowish side of normal, but no indication that she had a diagnosis of hypotension or low blood pressure.
Could you use the microphone, please, Mr. Pryor?
Foundation judge, I'd like to know what report he's referencing where he saw that information.
And Your Honor, my question was just about the medical records that he reviewed in general.
All right, then he should be able to specify which medical record she's talking about,
Mr.
Judge.
Pryor, this is not an objection, it's just an argument now. Is there an objection?
There is, foundation.
All right, the objection is overruled.
Haha.
In the medical reports you reviewed, you didn't see any sign of low blood pressure.
I did not.
In the medical records you reviewed, did you see any signs of seizures?
No.
In the medical reports you reviewed, did you see any indication that Tammy had had a prior history of any negative drug interactions between her prescription medication and herbal remedies?
No.
So there you go. Okay, that one worked. I don't know why that one worked and the others didn't, but there we go. So that was unequivocal from the medical examiner. After the ME was up there, then we had Alice Gilbert, who is a neighbor of the Daybells, who knew the Daybells very, very well. She talked about how uncomfortable she was when Chad brought Lori over to their house and they were, you know, being super touchy-feely with each other. And also Chad told her when he first called about Tammy's death, Chad told her not to tell the bishop. Now, she's the Relief Society president in the ward, which means that she is the leader over the women's organization, and she would work very closely with the bishop. And the bishop needs to know if one of the congregants has died. So here's what she said.
In the medical records you
Oh.
reviewed, did you see?
See, it stopped working. I jinxed it. Let's see. Let me find the spot. And we'll go from there.
After that, based on that phone call, without saying what Emma said, did you learn anything in relation to Tammy?
That she had passed away.
Objection, judge, calls for hearsay.
At some point, did someone else take the phone?
Chad, he took the phone.
And what did Chad tell you?
He asked me not to tell anybody for about an hour that she had passed away. And I said, well, I need to tell the bishop. And he said, no, don't tell the bishop. And I knew that the bishop was he was going to work. And so I called him anyway and informed.
Yeah, so good for her that she ignored Chad's weird instruction to not tell the bishop. So now this video is where Alice Gilbert, the neighbor, is telling about Chad bringing Lori over to her house just about a week, I believe, after Tammy died.
What did Chad tell you?
He asked me not to.
And again, gonna have to find the spot, sorry.
It was at the temple.
And judge, could we have some foundation as to the date, time?
Your Honor, that's already been discussed.
I must have missed it, judge.
Go ahead, Ms. Blake.
Too bad, Pryor.
Ms. Gilbert, at some point after that, did Chad and Lori end up coming to your house?
Yes. And it was in that week, and I think it was Friday from that Tuesday that he came over with her. And it was cold when they came in. I asked her if she was getting used to the cold, and she said she'd bought some warm clothes. And they sat on the couch. And it was awkward.
And when you say it was awkward, did you make observations of Chad and Lori's interactions?
Yes, they were very affectionate with each other, more than I had ever seen Chad. He was very affectionate with her, and they were giggling and laughing, and my husband and I were embarrassed.
Have you ever seen Chad act that way with Tammy?
No.
So that would be really awkward to see Chad with a new woman shortly after his wife's death and being super affectionate with her. That would have been so awkward to sit through. And I'm glad that she's here to testify of how he was acting and his actions immediately after his wife's death. Then, after Lori gets arrested, Chad shows back up at this neighbor's property and asks them to put their house up for bond so that Lori can get out of jail. Now, I don't know if you guys remember back in January of 2020 when Lori was arrested, they put her bond at $1 million. And there wasn't a bondsman in the world that was going to take that because she already had fled to Hawaii at one point, and there's a good chance that she would have run again had she been able to. So Chad was asking everybody he could think of to put their house up for bond. And this is another example of that.
What did I ever see?
I'm going to, again, have to fast forward to the correct place.
And I think you had previously indicated that he asked you about bond. Do you recall what he asked you in relation to that?
When he came in, he was quite upset, and he said he had to get her out of jail, and that he cried and said he said it was just killing her to be in jail, and could we put our house up for bond? And we asked him if he had family that could help him. He said no. And he mentioned another friend, I think. He said he couldn't help him. And we said we would think about it, and I think that was a Saturday. Sunday, we got a text from him, and he wanted to bring the bondswoman to our home and to meet her at our house that Sunday.
And did you in fact have another conversation with Chad about posting bond or putting your property up?
Yes, there was 2 conversations. This was the first one.
And what did you ultimately end up deciding?
No.
During your conversation with Chad regarding the bond, do you recall anything about the comment previously made about Lori's daughter dying coming up?
Yes, because I asked him, how many daughters does Lori have? And he said 1. And I said, well, when we met you, you told me she had a daughter that passed away. And he said, no, I didn't. And I said, yes, you did. And then when I asked him about the missing children, and he said it was a custody battle. So that's why I asked, how many daughters does she have? And then he denied telling me that.
Did you learn the name of Lori's daughter?
I only learned not through him. I didn't.
Have you since heard the name Tylee?
Yes,
Do you recall specifically talking to Chad about Tylee?
I did. When he asked about the bond, I was a little miffed that he had asked that. And so I'm asking you some questions. So I asked him, where are the children? And I asked him, where's Tylee? I said, she's a teenager. So I said, doesn't she want a life? And come out and say, I'm the missing girl. I want a job and a life and a boyfriend. And he just said, she didn't like people and she didn't like me.
Did something stick out about those statements?
He said, didn't.
So he used the past tense.
He did.
Thank you, Alice. Thank you. Thank you for saying Tylee's name. Thank you for asking the hard questions of Chad. And thank you for defending her and for not allowing Chad to just get away with his BS. How could it be a custody battle if Lori's husband was dead? Where are the children? Thank you. Thank you, Alice. I can't imagine the gall of somebody like Chad coming to ask his neighbor to put their property up as bond to get their wife out of jail under these circumstances. It must have just been wild for the people in this community to have to deal with that. After this, the next day, well, let me just go back up for just a second, because so on Thursday, that was pretty much the end of that day. And then on Thursday, we had the amazing, strong Kay Woodcock. She gave excellent testimony. She was very detailed. She gave so much information, background on Lori and Charles's relationship and her relationship with JJ and Tylee. It was amazing to see her strength, and I greatly appreciated her. And then we had Sheila, who is Chad Daybell's mother. She came and testified about meeting Lori so soon after Tammy's death and Chad's behavior as well. I can't imagine what she's been through. If you haven't seen Heather Daybell's 3-part interview on Hidden True Crime, it is probably the most important interview in this case. It will help you understand Chad and the dynamics of their family. Heather testified right after Sheila, and her testimony was essentially the exact same thing that she said in her interview on Hidden True Crime. The difference is that she got to be a little more animated, and also she had just had neck surgery and she was still recovering. And she was subpoenaed by John Pryor. She told John Pryor that her doctor didn't really want her to make the trip, but being called by the prosecution, that's a different story. So I'm really glad that the prosecution called her. I'm glad that she was well enough to travel. She too is an amazingly strong woman. I am so grateful for her pushback and for her standing up to her family, her entire family, including at times her own husband, in just calling out Chad's harmful behavior. One of the things she explains really well is that Chad and Tammy were living in Springville, which again, as I mentioned, is four-ish hours south of Rexburg. And Chad came up in 2015 to tell Heather and Matt Daybell that he was going to be moving to Rexburg. He started getting really involved in this prepper movement, and he had taken up with Julie Rowe. Julie Rowe is the one who said that she was having all these visions about earthquakes happening and that a lot of the Salt Lake area was going to be destroyed and that the church headquarters was going to have to move to Rexburg. Chad started listening to Julie Rowe when Julie Rowe wanted her book published by Chad. In this book, Julie Rowe talks about her near-death experiences, and she talks about having visions about what's going to happen in the future of the church and for the second coming at the end times. When Chad publishes that book, he sees that she's starting to get a lot of notoriety. He sees that people are paying attention to her and listening to her more often. And this is around the time when Chad starts promoting his books as truth and not as fiction. He starts saying that the events in his books are real, and he starts talking about his own experiences as being near-death experiences, whereas Heather says that before, he never talked about them being near-death experiences. Sounds kind of like Lori when at her allocution statement, she said that she'd had a near-death experience when she was giving birth to Tylee. Lori never mentioned that to anybody in the family at any time. And given the way she feels about near-death experiences and the fact that people keep saying that gives them special powers or special connection or special abilities to receive revelations from God, she definitely would have been talking about that because she wanted that credibility. She wanted that notoriety. So I think it's really odd that all of a sudden Chad sees Julie Rowe getting all this attention, and then he decides his books are not fiction, and he decides that he's had near-death experiences. That's also about the time that he came up to Rexburg and said that they would be moving up there. He also started working for Avow. He was writing blogs, and he was doing little chat groups and things like that on the Avow website. Now, I do a huge deep dive into Avow in another video on my webpage. If you haven't seen it, not my webpage, on my channel, If you haven't seen it and you're interested in what a vow is and why it's such a huge part of this entire tragedy, please go watch it. A vow has been classified by the FBI as being an anti-government organization. They are very pro-war. They are helping people prepare for a potential civil war. And Chad's and Julie's blogs and information were put behind a paywall on the Avow website. I believe that Avow on the website is where Chad and Lori met online way prior to October of 2018. And I think they were planning meeting in public for a very long time. That's what the whole video deep dive is about. So go watch it if you haven't seen it yet. But Heather talks about Chad wanting to move to Rexburg and the circumstances under which that happened and how it sort of evolved over time. And Heather talks about how she did not want Chad moving to Rexburg because she did not want him putting out these crazy ideas about the end times and having the same last name as her and her husband. She talks about how they have worked really hard to build their reputation and their practice there in Rexburg, and they didn't want Chad to come in and start being the crazy one, because I can see certainly, you know, if your brother comes in and starts saying crazy things and you're related to them, people are going to think that you're affiliated somehow unless you speak up against it. And Heather did. She spoke up to everybody who she possibly could to try and get them to listen that Chad's teachings were harmful, that Julie Rowe's teachings were harmful. Now, Julie Rowe did end up getting excommunicated because she wouldn't stop talking and she wouldn't stop publishing her book. And at that time, Chad came to Heather and said that he was done with Julie Rowe. And I think that this is about the time that Chad got involved with the Church of the Firstborn. And I think that that is how things started to take a left turn down the deep end. I have a lot more information about that. I haven't decided how much of it I'm willing to share yet. But if people are interested, let me know in the comments, because I may just do a members only video about that one. I just haven't decided. So I want to get back to the trial. So Kay testified, Sheila testified, Heather Daybell testified. And then later in the afternoon, we had the officer who went to Lori's townhome to do the welfare check on JJ, and he had his body cam video. Now, I think that's the first time that body cam video has been played in public. And again, I have another video that I did a couple of days ago that is a deep dive into the body cam footage. So I don't want to go all the way back over that again, but I do want to share this one thing that Pryor did on cross-examination, where he's trying to make the officer look bad because of a comment that the officer made during the body cam search. So I'm going to see if this is in the right place. It's almost in the right place, so we'll go ahead.
Okay, well, you showed up and were there for 10 minutes, right? She talked to you about a number of things and made a number of statements. Would you agree that a good number of those statements were not truthful? That's correct. And yet you didn't take any sort of action to detain her or to hold her, any type of any sort of action that way, law enforcement action to detain her, to hold her from fleeing on the 26th, right? Correct. Okay. Then you went back again and talked to her, correct?
On that same day?
Yes.
Yes.
And then again, you didn't take any action, correct?
Well, we hadn't established that JJ was not with Melanie Gibb at that time. Therefore, we had no reason to detain her.
This is my favorite part.
Now, I noticed during the tape recording that there was a comment that was made right after the first visit with on the recording. And if we have to go back, please tell me if you don't remember, we can revisit that. But after you left Lori Vallow's apartment, you make the comment, not. You remember saying that?
I do.
Yeah, and not, if I understand correctly, and please correct me, is a situation where that's sort of a code word for telling law enforcement to turn off your body cams and not record what you're about to talk about, correct?
That would be correct.
So in other words, as part of this investigation, you chose that we're going to not allow these statements to be recorded. We're going to stop this body cam because we don't want to reveal or provide the information that the three of you officers were going to discuss. Is that correct?
Objection argumentative.
Is that correct?
Yes, we were going to state our opinions.
Okay. We didn't get the benefit of your opinion then because you turned off the cam, right?
That's right.
And at the conclusion of the second body cam, did you do a little knock knock there too?
No.
Okay.
You can tell that this witness has kind of had it with John Pryor and his comments. And he's just not having it. So I was really grateful that he just didn't let Pryor have any quarter there. He just answered the questions matter of factly and said, yes, I behaved properly. Now, the detective, they finished the day and he was not quite finished. And so he came back on Friday to finish with the body cam footage of the second visit where they told Lori, they directed Lori to have Melanie contact the officer that called Melanie Gibb. And then they packed up their crap and left as fast as they could. The officer went the next morning to get a warrant to search the apartments. And when they arrived, the apartments were empty. They did a no-knock warrant. They broke the door open and there was nobody there. Not in 175, not in 174 where Melanie Boudreau lived, and also not in Alex's apartment either. Now, they recovered a lot of information there and they were able to recover some of the things that they needed for evidence, weapons and things of that nature. And he talked a little bit about some of those things and showed some of the body cam footage on that. So if you're interested in that, go back to the beginning of trial on Friday. That was the day that they discussed those things. And it's the same detective that you saw from yesterday. Pryor goes back to his BS again, trying to impeach this witness and make them incredible to the jury. And Judge Boyce, I think, finally had it. So I just want to share with you that moment where Judge Boyce expressed his displeasure at the way that John Pryor was acting. It was very professional, but you could tell that there was a lot that Boyce was holding back because he was very frustrated. Let me make sure this is the right place. It's not. So I'm going to have to go all the way to this is about the right place.
Search warrant to get Chad Daybell's phone is that he was married to Lori Ballard. Yes. There was no indication that he had any involvement in the disappearance at that time of JJ Vallow, correct?
Other than he wasn't responding to our requests.
Well, he wasn't responding to yours because you didn't call him, right?
Well, I believe attempts were probably made to his phone, not by myself.
Okay. And the question is that you said probably. So you really don't know the length and extent of what was taken to contact Chad Daybell, do you?
That's right.
So when you testified earlier today, when you said attempts were made to contact Chad Daybell, you really don't know what the attempts were made, do you?
I can't be specific, no.
Well, you can't give us any information because you don't know, isn't that right?
Objection argumentative. Overruled.
You don't know, do you?
Mr. Pryor. Once I make a ruling, then the witness gets to answer the question, so don't jump in with another question like that.
I'm sorry, Judge. You can answer it.
I know attempts were made.
Just infuriating. And if you want to watch that back and rewind, you can see when Judge Boyce calls John Pryor out, John Pryor turns around like a spoiled child because he doesn't want to face the judge while he is being berated for his behavior. It's just wild to me. I don't understand it. I don't get it. So anyway, that was the moment that I was like, okay, Judge Boyce, mad props to him. And also, you know, for just being able to keep his cool in a situation where you're dealing with an infuriating person. don't know if I would have been able to do that. So the last part of trial on Friday was the detective who helped in recovering the remains of the children. And again, it was super heavy. It was very hard to listen to. Those are the parts of the trial that I have to listen to on 2x speed because revisiting all of the emotions that came up for me the day that the children were found is really, really difficult. I've processed through a lot of that. And so it's not quite as disturbing as it used to be in the past, but it's still any human being who has feelings for other human beings are going to be disturbed by that. So if you don't want to rewatch the rest of that Friday, that's what got discussed at the end of the day on Friday. So I'm looking very much forward to what's going to go on next week. I need to make a decision about if I'm going to go back to Boise. If I do, at what time. I would really like to be there for the verdict, but I also know that deliberations can take several days. And I've been away from my kids and my family more than I probably should have recently. That long weekend trip was really important to me. And I will unpack that at some point over the next couple of days, probably just as a members only, just because it's a little bit more raw and I don't necessarily want it to be totally out there in the public. So again, I thank you for your support of the channel. I've mentioned before that this is just an expensive hobby for me. It really is. I'm having somebody to help me with the editing and presentation of my podcast just because it's more than I have time to do with my full-time job and my 2 kiddos who are still living at home and my kiddos who are living away, who I still support very much as their mom. And so I'm considering that at some point the channel may turn a profit. And if it does, at that point, I already have a nonprofit organization that I established several years ago. It's called the Beauty for Ashes Fund. And I established it when I first decided to publish my book, and the proceeds of my book were intended to go toward that nonprofit. I have not finished setting it up, even after all these years. And just because life happened, and also I still haven't established it as a 501c3 yet. That's something that's a little bit more involved. It does take some money, and I've had, different things come up over the last couple of years that my extra funds have gone towards. And so I just haven't had the time or the money to finish getting that foundation set up. But what I'm considering is that when and if the channel does turn a profit, I'm considering rebooting that nonprofit, the Beauty for Ashes Fund, and getting the 501c3 designation done, and then having the profits go towards that foundation. So if any of you out there know anything about establishing a 501c3 or any of how any of that works, I would appreciate some help. The Beauty for Ashes Fund was established in order to help people pay for therapy service, to help trauma survivors pay for therapy services. When I was going through my trauma recovery, I was in an intensive outpatient program, and I was with a group of women who I saw people coming in and out of the group over the course of the 3 months that I was in that group. And some of them were having to leave because they couldn't afford to continue their treatment. And so I wanted to establish a fund because I think if somebody is willing to go to therapy, and especially if somebody's willing to enroll in an intensive outpatient program, that was 8 weeks of therapy for 9 hours a week. And it was for people with complex trauma like I had. And if somebody who has experienced that much trauma and is willing to dig into it and do the work, I think it's tragic when they can't continue because of cost. And so that's why I established that fund. But I never did make $1 billion. And so there isn't any money in it right now. I had a few donations right at the outstart that did help pay for therapy services for a couple of people, and I was really grateful for that. but I haven't been promoting it nor getting the designation that I need to in order to do that. So if anybody has information about how to get that done in an efficient and cost-effective manner, I would appreciate anybody's help with that. So I will see you again next week. I will do another recap. And in addition, the episode 4 of my podcast is going to come out on Tuesday evening of this coming week, and we will do a live premiere for that. So I hope to see you soon somewhere on the channel. In the meantime, take care of yourselves, be kind to yourselves, and be well. Thanks for coming.